Good afternoon and welcome to all of you. This is Stephanie Kenner, part of the Learning and Development team at My Local Aggregation. You're joining us today for our webinar on construction finance. And Tuesdays is our New to Industry series. So this is intended for brokers that are new to the industry, somewhere within the first 2 years. Perhaps they're doing their formal qualifications or maybe even looking to join as a mortgage broker. Although today's particular topic, which is construction finance, is often misunderstood even for those brokers that have been in the industry for many years. So I would like to get some feedback. I can see many names here that we haven't seen before. So perhaps in the Q&A section, would you just give me a response to let me know whether you are brand new to the industry or already experienced, what sort of stage you're at? That would be fantastic to make sure that we pitch the information that would be suited to all of you. So today's session on construction finance, in a couple of minutes I'll be introducing our full-time broker mentor, and that is going to be Glenn Darcy. And Glenn Darcy's been in the industry for many, many years, and I'll tell you a little bit about his background in just a moment. But for those of you that might be joining us for the very first time today, today's session is recorded, so that after the session today, for any of those of you that would like the recording or the pack, we're happy to send that out to you. Oh, thanks everyone. I can see there's quite a number of years in the industry as well. Fantastic. So today's session is recorded, and there is also one CPD point that you would be eligible for, and we'll get that out to you as well. And that is both for MFAA and FBAA members as well. So during the course of today's session, and we will be presenting for approximately 45 minutes, any time during that, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A, and we'll either respond to those as we go, or else at the end of the webinar, we'll have some designated time for that. So Glenn Darcy, who is our full-time broker mentor, has been in the industry for 20 plus years. And he commenced his career with Aussie Home Loans. So I think for a lot of brokers that have been through Aussie, that's a very good training ground. He was self-employed for a number of years, building a successful brokerage with a big variety of customers and different loan types. So he's dealt with everything from first-time buyers, investors, multiple properties, multi-developments, and I know one of Glenn's passions is definitely construction finance, and he really has a lot to be able to share in this area. For those of you that have met Glenn, you'll know that a theme that's really consistent whenever he speaks is very much how he likes to take care of his customers first and also his referrers. He's very much a believer in customers for life, and so that everything he does or everything he teaches our mentees in regards to how they build relationships with people is far beyond just that transaction. It's that long-term relationship. He holds a diploma in financial planning and also a diploma in finance and mortgage broking. So what he'll be speaking to you about today in regards to construction finance is the various and differing packages that you might come across. Valuations, drawdowns, and part payments. So these are all things that you may not be very familiar with. Of course, you would be familiar with valuations from doing normal residential loans, but drawdowns and part payments and multi-valuations are quite unique to construction finance. So he'll dive in pretty deep into these areas and explain those. And he'll also be touching on client communication and the broker's role. So because construction finance does have long settlement time compared to normal, which might be 30, 60 or 90 days, the client communication and the touch points during construction finance are really key to be able to maintain and to to give that client the correct communication at each step, and be able to put them at ease, I guess, more importantly, because construction finance for first-time clients can be quite a stressful process. So with that, I'd like to introduce Glenn. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us today. Looking forward to this session.
Hey, Steph, I'm excited too. We were lucky enough last time we ran this particular webinar, we got really swamped afterwards, didn't we?
Oh, we sure did.
So we have brought this further forward into our normal rotation to allow those of you who may have sat through it before, who may be listening for the first time to gain some great experience out of this. It was one that I was a bit surprised with the amount of reaction that we got. So obviously there's a lot of construction deals going on out there, and we want to cover those things so that you guys out there can handle it really well.
Yeah, fantastic.
So from my point of view, we're here to talk construction loans. So strictly speaking, what are construction loans? Now, obviously the common answer is they're buying a block of land and building on it, but let's look a little bit more deeply to that. Firstly, from a business point of view, handling construction loans and understanding how they work really can help separate yourself from your competitors, guys. If you really know what you're talking about and you're able to work through that effectively, you'll become known as a bit of an industry expert, really, and people will come to you from all walks of life, and even other builders who you may not have relationships might come to you with some opportunity because you are known maybe as the local expert. Construction loans themselves, obviously a very different creature when compared to most other forms of lending, as Steph said earlier. They certainly do require a really good understanding of the time issues involved, and we're going to cover some of that now. And yeah, they do create a lot of work, but it's work that's really worthwhile, particularly in today's market, Steph. As you know, certainly guys, if most of you, I'm sure most of you are around the country, but I'm based in Melbourne, and out far east, far west, and also up to the north, there's a huge amount of construction stuff going on, lots of land banks being made available. And if you're good at what you do, today's market can be a fantastic opportunity for someone who's good at handling construction deals. Yes, they can take a long time to come to fruition. So commissions might be 12 months away.
Yeah.
And that's a little frightening, and hopefully none of you have just fallen off your chair if you've not heard that before. But it really depends as to land settlement and things like that. But if we're dealing with brand new land banks, sometimes we're seeing land settlements 12 months away from when the land was sold. So you need to be able to cope with that from a cash flow point of view. But even forgetting how you feel about that, your customers also will need to take a lot of management through this period. I read in an article a little while back, Steph, that one of the most stressful things people go through is a construction deal.
Oh, absolutely.
And the things that drive customers a little batty is just lack of knowing what's going on. Mm-hmm. Not even the common thing that some of you might be thinking about, where they drive past every day and they're not on, the builders are not on site every day. That's a common thing. That's really something you still need to manage with your customers, but that's fairly common. The biggest issue, and hopefully most of you haven't experienced this yet, but if you do, I guess we'll cover it now so you'll deal with it better, is that period from when you actually sign your building contract to the builder then going on site. That can take, depending on when you do it, 3 months, 4 months before they get on site. And that's allowing for the fact the land is ready to be built on right now. So why does that happen? Well, once a construction contract is signed off, it's only then that the builders themselves will go out and get all the plans and all the permits and the homeowner's warranty insurance set up. They go to the council, get all the engineering done. Now that stuff takes a lot of work. Now it's something that, as someone who worked very closely with some builders for quite a number of years, the builders almost never told their clientele that. They would sign it, they would just take the order, get the deposit paid, and okay, we'll catch you when we start. They wouldn't necessarily handle it. So if you're going to be a really professional broker and someone who really wants to stand out from the pack, I really strongly suggest, if you come across this situation, even before you come across the situation, even if you meet a client who's just looking to build at some point, tell them the truth. Tell them what goes on, because it'll make you stand out again, and it'll make people really understand what's going on. And even if they don't believe you, they will eventually, particularly if you're honest up front with them. Now, that's not there to talk them out. It's purely just to say, hey, listen, this is going to be the timeline that you're going to work with. This is what's going to happen as we move forward. So if you're managing your customer expectations really, really well, including these supposed periods of inaction, then you'll find that your customers will go through the whole process a little bit more smoothly. But most importantly, they'll respect you for that. They might get a bit upset with the builder, but they'll never get upset with you. And in fact, even if you're telling the builder that you might have a relationship with, that, hey, listen, I'm going to walk through this next period with your clients or our clients, are you okay with that? The builders will say, yes, absolutely, tell them. And that will also ultimately keep stress off the builder. So the builder's not getting 3 phone calls a day going, oh my God, you know, what's going on? It's been 6 weeks since we signed the contract. The land's settled. Why aren't you on site yet? One of my best friends, he's the general manager for a particular builder. And we laugh about this every time we get together, Steph. He gets these phone calls every single day.
All sites visits?
Oh, your site visits. Yeah, great site visits. It's just, you know, the builders can be on site, or maybe the brickies laid one layer of bricks and all of a sudden they look up, you know, for the next week, and there's a couple standing there with their arms folded going, why aren't you working faster?
Taking pictures.
Taking pictures, that's right. So handling the customer expectations really for you as a broker is almost the most important part, initially anyway, of handling the customer and really turning them into a lifelong client. Again, as Steph mentioned earlier, I have a very big belief in that. So if you're doing the right thing by your clients up front, it'll work for you as we move forward.
And this is I think one of the biggest opportunities with something like construction finance, because it's long and it's potentially stressful for people if it's their first time. This is the customer that's going to refer, because you've had to keep constant communication with them, and you've had to sort of really pave the way and reduce the stress. These are the customers that will refer you because you've made that experience really good for them.
Absolutely. If they're not scared by anything that's going on and you've given them all the necessary information, they'll probably even then, luckily maybe they'll build again at some point, and they'll certainly come to you for the finance, but they might even go back to that same builder again because it wasn't so stressful. Sometimes the customers get really upset with the builders just because the builders haven't given them the information, to the point to where even though they might build a magnificent home, solid, structurally sound, all of that, they won't go back to that builder just because they felt the builder didn't give them the information that they needed at the time, which is crazy. But if you're the broker giving them the information, one, obviously the client will come back to you all the time. Two, they might still go back to that same builder if they're going to build again. Anyway, so let's talk about house and land packages. So exactly what is a house and land package? Now, at the risk of you guys sitting and laughing your head off over that question, there are house and land packages, and then there are house and land packages. Firstly, a builder will sell a house and land package, or even a land agent will sell a house and land package just because the ultimate picture is to put the house on the block. But typically, and certainly again, I can only speak for Melbourne, but I know that this happens in Brisbane, on the Gold Coast, and even up on the northern beaches of Sydney, and out west, certainly out west in the mountains. When you buy the block of land, that's got to settle first. Now that sounds pretty silly, but not a lot of people understand that. Now, the biggest question is, firstly, from that point of view, is when is it supposed to settle? Is it ready in 30 days? Is it going to be ready in 60 days? Is it 12 months away, like I said earlier? You need to understand that. So when we move forward, that land has got to settle first. Typically, what a lot of people do these days is they buy the land. It might still be 12 months away from settling, but they buy it with a subject to finance clause, which is a nice, secure, safe way, isn't it, Steph, to deal with that. Now, the issue with that is, of course, that even if the land is settling in 6 months, you still have to get the finance done on the block. And we're going to talk a bit more about this as we move through this program today, about how to handle that. everyone that I know that I've ever met, they might buy the block of land today that's 12 months away, but they're still looking to build almost immediately. Now, obviously that can't happen. The builder, you may not know this, guys, but the builder's not allowed anywhere near the block until the title has changed over. They can't go in and do engineering or drill the pits or do the soil tests, which is generally the first thing. They really can't do that until the block's in your name. So you're the one authorising them to go on your block. The developers won't let them do it, and there's some legal precedence for that. Don't ask me what it is, but it just can't be done. So firstly, if we're looking to buy a block of land now, or if we have already bought a block of land now and we're buying it on finance, that's fine, there's no issue. We'll talk about packaging in a second, but at this point, let's say they have not spoken to a builder. That's cool. That's one avenue. From there, they might have had maybe an initial conversation and gotten some basic pricing, and that's cool too. Or conversely, they might be in final discussions with their builder, but the contract's not quite ready yet. And that's fine. The contracts do take quite some time to get together as well. That's not a 5-minute operation. So please, again, be very mindful of when you're talking to your clients about this stuff. Even if they sign or put a deposit down today, it might still be a couple of months before the contract is ready. Part of that is normally picking colours and getting all the specifications of the house all ready to go. And they won't put together a final contract until that's ready to go. And as I said earlier, even once the final contract is done, then the builder goes out and does the land stuff and the legal stuff after that. So with payments and things like that. So let's talk about how the money flows, okay, with building. Firstly, a lot of people believe that, in fact, our next slide, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but a lot of people have lots of different beliefs about how the money works, but this is how it works in the real world. Once a house is getting built, the loan is drawn down in stages. Now, we're going to talk about this in more detail as we go. There are 5 distinct stages, and again, we'll cover those in a minute. And obviously, during that period, payments go up during each stage because more money is being drawn down as we go. And then at the end of the day, once the house is built, then we go from interest-only repayments, which accrue each month based on the amount that's been spent so far, and then they turn into principal and interest loan, generally 30 days after what's called C of O, or if I put that into English for you, certificate of occupancy has been issued. Now, you can't move into a house without a certificate of occupancy. So even no matter what you try to do, it can't be done. The builders themselves have no say on this. The council have the final sign off, and they're the ones who issue the certificate of occupancy. Once that's issued, then again, as I say here, from a financial point of view, the loan reverts back to a principal and interest loan, typically 30 days after that's been issued. So let's look at packaging these things. Now, packaging loans is really the best way to go. Did we miss one? Packaging loans, got to make sure we know what we're doing there. So firstly, typically, as I mentioned earlier, let's say they bought a land loan, bought a block of land, and we need to do a land loan because they put finance clause in there. So, that's cool. What we need to do is make sure that we do a land loan first, okay? If indeed that they're then looking to build at some point in the not too distant future, let's say 6 months, just for the sake of the argument. At that point, what we try to do is go out and get some idea of the pricing that the building might be. Now, it doesn't have to be set in stone, doesn't have to be accurate, but we get some idea. And so what we'll do at the same time as we put the land loan together, we'll get pre-approval for the whole lot. So now this might be a bit hard to take on board, so I apologise if I'm skipping through this a little quickly. I'm just going to slow down a little bit here to help make it clearer for you. We're going to put 2 loans together at this stage. Now, why, might you ask, is one, we have to for the land deal. We've got to have an unconditional approval in order for the finance clause to be met. So we've got to have a land loan happen first. but we want to go to the bank and say, hey, listen, we're looking for this, but we're also looking for an extra, let's say 300,000 to build the house on top. So what we do is we go, first loan is a land loan, unconditional approval, please. That's what we're looking for. And at the same time, we're going to let the lender know, let's say Mr. ANZ, that yes, there's a land loan in place, but we're also looking to build on it. So what we're trying to do now is we're going to add the land loan to this second loan. So let's call the land loan 175 plus 300 to build. We're going to go to the bank and say, now we need 475. We want pre-approval for that. So our customers we can see that they can clearly afford to buy the house that they're looking to buy down the track. I hope everyone understands that. Throw something in the Q&A if that's clear. Hopefully that's clear enough. Otherwise we can talk about it later if you feel the need to. But the best way to deal with that is, as I've said here, right? So loan 1 will be a land loan for unconditional approval, and loan 2 is what I've called their absorption of the land loan to build. Now you can call that a refi of the land loan if you want. I like to use absorption. It's just a terminology thing. There's no rules there. But in essence, you're putting a second loan together just for pre-approval. Now, if you do those numbers there, you'll go, hang on, that's 650 grand's worth of borrowing. Well, that's not the case at all. The final loan will be 475, and that first loan will be absorbed. That's why I use the word absorbed. Will be absorbed or refinanced into that second loan. Now, a question that I do get when we cover this is that. Sorry, I just got sidetracked by a question I just had thrown at me. Do we get clawed back on that first loan? Well, the answer to that's yes. Unfortunately, that's the case. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, you're still going to be borrowing 475. So clawback on 175 grand is not a lot. You're looking for the main loan there. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, and that is absolutely key, Glenn, because some customers might be feeling that they've got the funds to do the initial purchase,
yep,
or they may not even know. So we've got issues of, do they have enough funds for that total package?
Yep.
And is the LVR going to be acceptable?
Oh yeah, the LVR we'll talk later. But before we skip to the next slide, you raise a good point there, actually, Steph. What does happen a lot, and this may be common to some of you who might have come across this before. I've seen it before, where you'll get caught up and you'll get the land loan done. But for some reason they can't afford to build the house they want, and you don't find that out until 6 months later, after they've owned the land for a little while. Let's say the land's just settled. They've been sitting on that land for 6 months waiting for it to settle. They then go to a builder, they get all excited, they think they can buy this $300,000 house and put it on top of their block, and for some reason either their lives have changed, there might be a change of job, there might have been a credit issue, there might have been something else that actually precludes them now from building this house. So all I can really suggest there is that you try to do it this way, where you do it the way I suggest, is do loan 1 at first, but at the same time, absolutely the same time, same day if you can, do the second loan. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Otherwise, yes, you'll get in a world of hurt, and you'll get some very upset clients on your hands who won't be upset with you, but they'll be upset. It's not a great thing to come across. I've had people in tears in front of me that have come to me sometimes from other brokers because the other broker didn't do the right thing by them, and without bagging other brokers, it could be that they've just had a life change. There could have been a job change, which obviously precludes them from borrowing at that point. Might have gone down in income. Something's happened that's just stopping them getting this second loan. Whereas if we're pre-approved, obviously without having to worry about payslips too much, then the second loan should fall into place straight away.
Yeah. Glenn, if you don't mind, we might answer some of these questions as we go, because I think they're really topical to these slides. So we do have a question about getting unconditional approval until the land has title. Okay,
that's a good question, and thanks, Martin, for asking it. If you're asking about getting unconditional approval on the land, yeah, absolutely you can. It just won't settle until it's titled.
Yes.
You can get an unconditional approval on a block of land that's 12 months away if you really want to. It's a bit risky, but remembering that if you've got a customer who's bought a block of land and has been smart enough to make it conditional upon finance, then it's your role really to get it and turn it unconditional, even if the land's 6 or 12 months away. Obviously, you have to manage your customer very carefully in that instance to let them know, don't go changing your jobs, don't go getting any more credit, let's not change the landscape, because obviously if we've got a long-term settlement, you might have to go back and redo it again, but at least at the time that it was necessary, you were there for your customer. So hopefully that cleared that up, Martin.
And I think, Glenn, that also answers this other question we've got about pre-approvals, and I think that's the case with any pre-approvals, particularly when there's a long distance of time and circumstances can change for the customer.
Thank you for asking this question. The question is on the table here, guys. What about pre-approvals? They're not really worth the paper they're printed on. I'll answer that by saying there are pre-approvals and then there are pre-approvals.
Yeah.
Now, without sort of talking about this in too much detail, because we'll run out of time today, but just quickly, if any of you have come across this before where they've seen pre-approvals that aren't worth the paper they're written on, you can walk into any particular bank branch, on a Saturday morning and not have any information with you, and they'll ask you, how much do you earn, how long you've been in your job, how long you've been in your house, and how much deposit have you got? And they're generally the 4 questions that they'll ask you. Mm-hmm. And if you answer it effectively, they'll go, right, yep, okay, you're pre-approved for $500,000. Mm-hmm. Now, realistically, you've not given them any proof of anything. You've not provided pay slips or anything like that. So that kind of pre-approval, absolutely, Anya, is not worth the paper it's written on. A good professional broker will actually look for a conditional approval subject only to the valuation. So what I mean by that is that they will have provided all their pay slips, all the ID. It's a full file that's been presented to the bank, just without a valuation on the property. So they'll do credit checks, they'll do everything. So all you really need at that point, once that's been done, is provide the contract of sale, and your conditional approval will become unconditional as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll just cover off before we move on the question about the finance clause being 14 days. Well, this will vary.
Oh, of course it will, yes.
Depending on the lender. That was just your example, Glenn.
That's right. So, Monica, that's a good question. Thanks for asking, but that was purely just an example. More often than not, we'll see 7 days, won't we, Steph?
Sure.
In real estate in Melbourne anyway, we'll see 7 days. I always try and talk it out to 14 just to buy you a little bit of time if that's at all possible. If you ever come across anyone who's arranged for a 21 days or 30-day finance clause, they consider yourself lucky. So, no, that was just my example. Thank you.
Okay, good. And we might cover off some of the FOG questions later.
Yep, sure.
First homeowners grant, that would be fantastic.
All right, so let's move forward.
Great. Excellent.
All right, so this next thing is talking about house and land packages again. Typically speaking, if you're able to come across a land and a fixed price contract at the same time, so in other words, the land is titled and pretty much ready to go, or it's titled 30 days out, and the clients have held on to the block of land maybe for a little while, or they've just bought it recently, but they've already been in contact with a builder, and they've got a fixed price contract signed, then really in that situation we only have to do the one loan. We don't have to do the 2 loan scenario we discussed before. So in this case, it'll be one loan for a construction deal of $475. Just use the numbers that we've been playing with before, and that's all you have to worry about. No land loan tied up with that. And that's really based on that question there: how far away is land settlement? If land settlement's 9 months off, then okay, you probably can't go unconditional, only because the lenders might sort of say, listen, we need to get updated details. But if it's not too far away, then that's how you go about doing it. Other construction loans. So as an example, let's say you come across a customer who might already have a block. And as an example, questions to ask: are we refinancing this block, or do they own it outright? If it's a refi, then purely that's great. It's just a straight refi on a block of land plus the funds to build. I'm not talking LVRs today here, guys, okay? Well, that can be another conversation for another day. We might have a quick chat about valuations later, but if it's fully owned, of course, that's great. You can start either way, but either way, that's just a single loan. First option A is obviously refinance plus the money to build. Otherwise, it's just the money to build.
Yep.
So just be that one loan of 475. All right, so let's talk about valuations a little bit. Anyone who's ever done construction loans, and I know that there's a couple of experienced people online today with us, I can probably feel you rolling your eyes right now about valuations. Look, I'm not going to talk the numbers, but let's talk about the types of valuations that there are, and let's cover that. So there's basically three forms of valuation out there. There's a computer-based val, which I've got contract of sale is there for the land. That's very common if you're just buying a block of land. They know that the valuer is not going to go out and run around in his four-wheel drive out beyond that cow that's 600 metres off the road to find your block. That's a bit silly. But they'll just use a contract of sale, generally up to 80% on that before they worry about anything else. Then we're talking curbside valuation. So let's say it's a block of land that's pretty much not far off. So let's say the roads are dug and all the pits are done and all the curbs are done and maybe not footpaths and things, but someone can get in and have a look. The valuer might determine that we need to go in and have what's called a curbside valuation, where they just go out and have a bit of a quick sniff at the block, make sure it is there, and they'll sometimes measure it too. Otherwise, we're talking about what we call a full valuation. This is typical more so where we're building in this case. So, we've got the block of land, we're ready to build on it. They'll do what's called an as-if complete or an as-completion or on-completion valuation. That is a full valuation. They need to see the land contract. They also need to see the final fixed price contract, and they will do their numbers based on what the property is worth once it's actually complete. So they're the prime valuation issues that go on. Okay, hopefully that's all pretty clear. We won't talk the dollars and valuation issues just now anyway. All right, so let's have a look at an overview, and this might be the stuff that interests most of you, I hope. Now, this might seem a little complicated, but bear with me. If you can learn to explain this to your customers, that will take you from being a pretty good broker to a goddamn good one in their eyes, and you can show them the numbers to show them that it's not that scary. But you can also teach them prior to getting started with a builder how the construction loans work. So let's get this started. So first thing is there are 5 distinct drawdowns through any construction phase. The first one, now these are just guidelines, okay, please. HIA and master builders look at this slightly differently, and sometimes the builders themselves will look at it slightly differently as well. So this is just a guideline, okay? But typically at the first stage, which we'll call the slab stage, normally it will be 20% of the actual construction price of the house. Now, if you've got pen and paper in front of you guys, I'm not asking you to write too much down, just write 300,000 down. That's going to be the construction value of this particular example. Once the slab goes down, then we move into the frame stage, which is stage number 2, and that is normally around about the 30% mark. It's a fair bit of work there, getting all the timber done or steel or however the house is getting built. Then we have the third stage, which we call the lockup. The lockup is essentially brickworks are done, windows are done. The house, when this stage is done, can be locked up and made secure. Primarily because we're going to move into the next stage, which we call fit out. And the fit out is things like the plasterboard, the painting, the second lot of electrical fixing, all of that kind of thing. And then we move on, once that's done, to what we call the final. And the final might be the painting. Sometimes it'll be the tiling, sometimes the tiling might be a bit earlier. But generally the cosmetic stuff is done at this point, including the installation of the appliances and things like that. Hopefully you'll never fall into the situation where your appliances go in one day and they're ripped out the next. I've seen that before. But that's how the numbers really work. And as we move forward, the valuer generally reviewing this file will go through each stage to make sure that they are done correctly. The builder will go through a bit of a process here at the end of each stage, and he will forward sometimes to your customers, sometimes to you if you've got a great relationship with the builder, or sometimes directly to the lender, his claim for those particular stages. And that's why the bank will generally send a valuer out in more cases than not to make sure that each stage is done correctly. Of course, once that's all finished and everyone's happy and everyone's been paid, then the certificate of occupancy can be issued, and next thing you know, you're chucking your stuff into a back of a removal van and off you go.
Yeah, so it's very important, I think, for the clients to understand with this valuation process, Glenn, that firstly, this is all peace of mind for the customer, that the lender is not going to advance funds for each of those stages until they're absolutely satisfied that it's been built to that particular stage.
Absolutely, yes.
So it really does protect the customer. If the customers are saying, wow, that's a lot of valuations, that's a lot of expense, because in many cases that would mean, 5 valuation costs and so on. Yep.
Look, most lenders won't charge 5 lots of valuation. They might charge a flat fee, let's say, $250 or something like that to do the 5 drawdowns. I'm not going to be silly enough to think that the valuer physically goes out there each time. He might, some do, he may not, but that's, they're taking that risk. They have their own PI cover to sign off on. But it is, like you say, Steph, it's great peace of mind. And I think if you're able to convey this to your customers, they're not going to be surprised. One other thing I want to cover is that a lot of people, when they're new to the building game, and guys, you might hear this, they may say, look, our builder's going to do the build and, we only have to make payments when it's done. Now, listen, that has happened. There have been companies that have been around that have tried that. And unfortunately, though, and I think you can probably understand why, cash flow being the biggest issue there, is that most of those companies who have offered that over time are no longer with us. They just run out of money.
Yes.
So the last thing you want to do, even if you do come across a builder who is offering that, payment on completion, and only payment on completion, I'd be asking your clients to ask the builder some pretty hard questions. Even if the customer asks you to make them, then make them, to make sure the builder himself is flexible enough and has the cash flow to build 10 or 20 or 30 homes like that, because that's a lot of cash being tied up. So a lot of people tend to think that. And the other one that comes up from time to time is, do we have to pay for the whole thing up front? Now, that's not a common question, but it does come up from time to time. And so people also then tend to freak out because they, oh my God, I can't, the house is not even getting built and I'm heading into a $475,000 mortgage on top of my current mortgage or on top of the rent. I can't possibly manage that. Now, seriously, if you come across that, please just mention to your customers, look, that's extremely uncommon, and really, I've not seen it. I've heard it spoken about a lot where customers just don't know how the system works, really, and that's just their lack of information. So again, for you being the professional broker, give them the information, tell them that that's really weird. If they're getting it from another source, or if the builder has mentioned that, then I would take that on myself to talk to the builder and say, look, what do you mean by that? Because my customer has heard black and you're saying what. So just make sure that that's pretty clear. But what I've showed you here is the most common scenario, and we're going to have a look at a detail of that now. So talking about repayments being handled, well, this is how it goes. Essentially, this is going to look a little messy, but the customers do think the one or two things, which I've just covered, either no repayments at all until done, or payment in full up front. But that, as I said, that's not the case at all. One of the things you can say to make it nice and simple for your customers is repayments are always held as an interest-only payment, and that only the payment that's expected is the interest-only component on the amount that's been accrued or drawn down each month. Now, I'm going to show you something in a little bit that will help you be able to explain this quite well, and I'll cover my thoughts on that in just a second. But that's how she works, 99.9% of the time. and we're going to show you the math behind that in a sec. So we're going to base this on a $175,000 land loan and a 300 grand construction loan with monthly drawdowns. Now, when I say monthly drawdowns, the drawdowns are always taken out monthly on the monthly balance, even if they're halfway through a stage. The payments are not based on a stage-by-stage basis. It's purely what the balance is at the end of each month. Okay. So anyway, let's just roll forward and have a look at this now. So this is a great example. I had this taught to me a number of years ago. I used to scribble this on paper for my clients. Yeah. Then eventually I turned it into a spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. And this is us doing it for you so you can see it as a way to explain it to your customers really well. So let's look at the situation. We're going to look at the amount being drawn down. We're going to look at the interest-only repayments that are expected at that particular point. So let's say these guys have gotten their land loan and we've got our 5 stages as we go. So stage 1, 20%, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and stage 5. Again, we've put those percentages in. I know we showed you those earlier, but we just thought it was easy for you to perhaps get a better understanding of what we're talking about. So our land loan amount is 175 grand, and at this point, it'll stay as a land loan until the first stage is complete, and then it turns into a construction loan, quote end quote. So your balance will vary, of course. So we're looking at you're refinancing or absorbing that land loan plus that first stage, which is now 60 grand. So your balance is now 235, and your interest only repayment on that should be, oh no, we're going the other way. So we're going to build our list first. So the second stage, your balance will go up by 90 grand, which is 30% of the 300. Your third stage, it'll go to your balance will go up by 60,000. Fourth stage, your balance will go up by 45,000, being 15%. And then when your final stage is done, so that's your fit out and your final 30 grand. So your balance is up at 460 now. And here are the interest only repayments. Okay, so for the land loan, it's 587. Don't ask me what rates I've set this at. I think I set it at just a current market competitive rate. Yep. I wasn't shopping for the best deal on this one, just to show you. So as you can see, as we move forward, the repayments go up, obviously, but they're not that ridiculous. Now, I want to stop here just for a second and cover something that I used to hear a lot of. People are either in their current home, but we won't talk about that. That can be another conversation for another day, how to handle that. But they might be renting, as an example. So they might be paying, I don't know, $1,000 a month in rent or more, $2,000 a month in rent. Now, provided they've obviously been good enough to save their deposit for their land and have some money towards the build, what we're trying to do is show them by this stuff here on the right-hand side how affordable it is. Now, it hurts a little bit towards the end, as you can see, but how affordable it is to be able to build. It's not going to kill you financially to do that, provided you can manage your money well. Okay. People will think, oh my God, what is the final repayment on this? Which again, after the certificate of occupancy has been issued, in this particular case, the full P&I repayment would be $22.75. So as you can see, okay, once they've moved out of their rental property now, as an example, and they're paying for their own home at this point. Yes, the repayments go up, of course, but while it's getting built, it doesn't really hurt that much. And now remember too, that a lot of building takes sometimes 6 months, sometimes 9, sometimes 12, depending on the builder and size of the house and double story versus single. So these repayments do drag out over a period of time, but the cash flow isn't too bad. And I've not seen anyone get too upset about that once you show them this. But it's also great, Steph, hopefully you'll argue this point with me or agree with me. It's also, at this point, a great way to weed out those people who perhaps can't afford it. Mm-hmm. Hopefully even before they bought their block, excuse me. Because if they have a heart attack overpaying, say, $1,292 for 1 month or maybe a couple of months while that stage is going on, they certainly then aren't going to necessarily be able to pay for the full repayment at the end of the day. Now, I'm not saying you do this to scare people off. This is purely just a way to inform them as to what's going to happen along the way. Hopefully, even by the time we get to this conversation, you'll know that they can afford it. You maybe just have to keep it positive and show them how they can afford it. But this, guys, is how she works. If you can get this in and get used to putting it together this way, you're giving some fantastic information to your customers, showing them that they can do it, and if they're ready to rock and roll and they can do it, then off you go. Okay, so it's just a great way to show people and give them the information that they need.
Yeah. So Glenn, in this example, let's just say that the customers did have $2,000 in rent that they were currently paying.
Yep.
The lender is not going to be taking into consideration that month where you've got an overlap, you know, where you're heading towards your stage 5 and you're still paying rent, are they?
No, not at all.
The lender's not considering that in the serviceability.
No.
So it really is up to you to be able to explain it properly to the client, because the client's getting assessed on the new repayment, but they need to understand that there's going to be some months there where it's going to feel a bit tight and they need to feel very comfortable with it.
No, you're absolutely spot on. Because the lender will only look at the final position, they will look at the serviceability on the land loan with your rent, but they won't be looking at it with the construction. So that once you moved into the home, they'll just we'll assume the rent just goes. So that's a great point, Steph. Thank you. So hopefully that's pretty clear, guys. If you've got any other questions about that kind of stuff, and we've got some good questions coming in now, and we'll cover those as we go, as best we can.
Yeah,
but
fantastic.
In essence, guys, that's how a construction deal works. Hopefully that's fairly clear for you. I know it might be a bit difficult to take on board seeing it the first time. I am available to talk to if you want to have a chat to me about it, and we can talk to you about this in further. We do tape these, so we can send this back out to you so you can have another look at it. But as far as I'm concerned, if you can get your head around being very good with construction deals, I promise you work will come out of the blue. Once you're known as a bit of a construction expert, you will for sure get lots of work, because there are lots of builders out there who are dealing with bank managers who don't know how to put it together, or other brokers who aren't that really interested in doing it. Because there are a lot of brokers out there who run a bit scared from this stuff, don't they?
Oh, for sure.
And we want to make sure you don't run scared of this. You should be willing to put your hand up and go, hey, I know this stuff. I can do this for you. Let me show you how it works. And even if you've got a customer who might still be talking to someone else, either another broker maybe, or a bank manager in particular, and you show them all of this and you really give them all info they need, even more than they need, they'll come to you, because you're the expert now. You're the guru. You're the one who knows what's going on, and they'll come to you. So it's certainly in my career, I found the construction stuff to be extremely fulfilling. Yes, sometimes it might be a long time before you see comms, but it is absolutely worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look at some of these questions, Glenn. Firstly, let's talk about the timing of the first homeowners grant, and when does that get paid? Yeah,
that's a great question, actually. Thanks for asking that. Typically speaking, the first homeowners grant is made available when the slab stage is done. It won't be released at the land stage because it is a first homeowners grant, not a first landowners grant. Sounds a bit silly, but that's the way it is. Now, some lenders over time have changed that around a little bit. You might find the odd special where they'll release it early, but typically speaking, it's when the slab goes down.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So that can be built into the loan?
Yep, you can use that as a form of deposit. Or if you want to get the first homeowners grant in your own pocket, you won't actually see it till the end of the build.
That's right.
They'll only release it for construction at the slab stage if it's being used for the construction.
Yep.
So what I mean by that is that if you're using that to add to your deposit, then it'll be used that way and it'll be treated that way. One of the other rules, which I did forget to mention, is that any money that's being put in by the customer, including the first homeowners grant, has to be put in first. So this is a super point. It's a question I used to get asked a lot. You can't keep saving. Well, sorry, let me rephrase this. You can save all you like while the place is getting built. That's not a problem. but those savings can't be used as future savings to help this deal fall into place. Any money that you're putting in up front has to be put in up front, and the builder, this is the best way to look at it, the builder will make available the final run of money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a matter of I've got 10 grand now and I'll have 30 grand in 6 months' time. I want to put that all together as a 40 grand savings plan. No lender will allow you to do that as we speak. You've got to put all your money in up front. It's known as hurt money a little bit colloquially. Mm-hmm. Excuse my English there, within our industry. But if the clients have the money up front, then they can move forward. If they don't, then they've got to get it together. Then we move forward from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the same as any other genuine savings guideline,
yeah,
I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the same as that.
Absolutely.
So Martin's asking us a question about the land and build loan, 475, which was only drawn down to 460. What happens to the other 15,000, which has been paid out of cash as the deposit to the builder?
Yeah, Marty, thank you for that question. I saw that when it came up. Yeah, in that program, what I did is I allowed a 5% deposit to the builder.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, that's the way it runs, unless there's a pile of equity in the land, as an example, or the customers have got cash. But typically, the early stages, the builder will want a minimal deposit up front. Might be even $1,000 just to commit them to the project. But when the contract is signed, typically they want the balance of 5% at that point. Mm-hmm. That's why I did the numbers that way. So I apologise if that confuses anyone. But thanks, Marty, for asking that question.
Yeah. Yes, of course, there's the other scenario that someone might have equity in a block of land that they've been holding on to for a number of years.
Yeah. So in that case, let's say in one of the slides there we had where they own the block outright.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, necessarily you might only just have to give the builder $1,000 at that point, just as an initial deposit. And then we talk to the builder. You as the broker would talk to the builder on your customer's behalf to say, hey, listen, he owns this block of land outright. He's not going to give you 5% when they sign the contract. Because it's all in equity in his home, and we're not going to go pulling it out unnecessarily. That's just a conversation that needs to be had with the builder, and most builders are okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. We've also got a question in regards to how long is the process from the purchase of land to completion. So there's a lot of variables with this.
Oh yeah, okay. So let's talk about the purchase of land part first. I mentioned earlier that in this day and age, you can buy a block of land that's 6 to 12 months away from settlement. Mm-hmm. Well, those dates will be whatever those dates are. Then if we're talking about completion of the construction, knowing that the builder can't get on site until the land is titled, then there's obviously the construction time frame on top of that. Now, depending on which builders you talk to, mm-hmm. And the size of the house and the complexity of the house, and the weather and all sorts of other things, it could take 3 months, 9 months, 12 months to build a house. So it's not an easy question to answer. It might be a question you get a lot as a broker. I think the only way you can answer that is say, look, we really don't know. That'll just depend on all sorts of variables. But if you give them, I guess, the worst case scenario without making it too scary, then the clients will be satisfied with that.
That's right. So I mean, what you do know, or what the customer would know, for example, is if they have already found the builder.
Yep.
So certain builders will have a clause in their contract that says this is our build time,
yep.
right?
Yep.
And if we don't meet this build time of 6 months or 9 months, this is what's going to happen.
Yep.
So once you've found a builder, you know what the build time is. At that point, if you haven't purchased the land, it'll depend very much on where that piece of land is.
That's right.
And
when it's due to sell.
And when it's due to sell.
That's right.
So you won't know for sure until you've purchased the land.
Yep.
And then you add that settlement time onto the build time.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So it can drag out quite a bit, but that's just the way it goes. One other point on top of that, just quickly, is that some builders will say, look, we can build in 20 weeks. And that's all fine. Make sure when you do see the contract that there is, it's not called a sunset clause. I just can't think of the name. It escapes me for the moment, but where they will pay you a penalty if they do running late. If you see that clause, that's great, but don't stop reading there. You want to keep reading because invariably there is some fine print with that stuff, and the weather is generally the most common fine print. Subject to the weather, it might rain for 6 months. depending on where you are. But so that, you know, they won't necessarily say we're going to build it in 20 weeks, no matter what, and it rains for the first 6 weeks. There'll be all sorts of exit penalties and clauses. If you as the customer decide to change the house halfway through the build, well, that creates time delays, etc., etc. But it's a valid question. It's one that should always be asked. How long does it take you typically to build? If they tell you whatever they tell you, then ask maybe to meet a couple or talk to a couple of their customers that have built over the last couple of years to see if that's accurate.
Yeah.
The builders will sometimes let you do that, depending on your relationship with them. But other than that, yeah, the time frame has to be pretty liquid. It just needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Glenn, there's one other thing I want to touch on before we let people go, and this is a really important one in new estates.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot in Melbourne, and in those new estates, particularly if you've settled your property and you've moved in, and you may be one of the first, and there's still a lot of building going on in your suburb. What would you say? I know that there's sometimes issues with those new estates where a customer has purchased a house and land for $500,000,
Yep.
and then sometime later they realise their neighbours had their property valued, but the valuations haven't stacked up to what they've actually paid.
That is a super point. Hopefully none of you have experienced this yet, but it's not something you might want to wave in every customer's nose, but just some information for you guys. It's very, very common in that circumstance where someone has bought a house, built it, they've moved in 6 months ago, they're in a new estate, still surrounded by lots of vacant blocks, but lots of construction going on. Well, typically in those areas, of course, there's not a lot of sales of these established homes going on because there are no established homes in there, typically, or might be a few.
Yep.
So the valuers will, again, some of you would know this, some may not, the valuers will go through and look at, when they're valuing a property, of what's called comparable sales. So what else is going on in the area with housing movement? What are property values worth? So this is something just great for you to know. Typically speaking, in that circumstance, someone's new in their home, relatively new, there's not a lot of activity in the area other than land sales and construction, and they want to refinance their house to 90%, just for the sake of the argument. And they think that their house that they paid $500,000 for is still worth $500,000. Typically, forget it. I know that sounds really harsh, but the property value will have fallen away quite a bit. Now that's very, very common in new estates. It doesn't stay there, and it doesn't stay there very long. But because there are no comparable sales in the area, the valuer can't give the property, they can't go back to its on completion val that they might have done 6 or 12 months ago. Because now they're looking at trying to sell the home or doing it on a sale basis or a fire sale basis. And the property values will have fallen away quite a bit. So something to look out for, just as a bit of a tip. If someone calls you in, you've never met them before, and they're calling you in and looking to do a refi, and you're driving into a brand new estate, and you already know that they're looking for a 90% refi on a house that they spent, $500,000 on 6 months ago, and moved into 6 months ago, be very nervous. There's a conversation there to be had about looking after your customer, but that's another conversation. But just be aware that the property is not going to value at what the customers believe it was worth 6 months ago. It just doesn't happen. Now, it will bounce back. Don't get me wrong. Once the area becomes more established and we start to see some house sales, the house will absolutely bounce back, probably way beyond that $500,000. But it is a very common problem. Okay, so please just be aware of it. I'm just giving you some free info here. It's not something you need to be too concerned about, I wouldn't think, unless you find yourself in that position. But just be aware that that does happen. And your customers will argue with you long and loud. And unfortunately, that'll make you seem like the bad guy a bit if you can't explain it the right way, which is why we've spent a minute answering that question, which is a fantastic question. So thanks for asking it. We needed to cover that. And I think it's a very important point for you guys to understand.
And it is one that may come up, Glenn, because the customer might even have been in their property for 1 year.
Yep.
And they made a number of purchases to do with electrical equipment and furniture.
Yep.
With interest-free terms.
Yep.
And they've got to the stage where they're now being charged high interest, and it feels like the logical solution, if it's not a total refinance, to at least top up their existing loan and incorporate that expensive debt.
That's absolutely right.
But there's no room.
No, that's right.
Because of what you just described.
That's exactly right.
And
that happens with money put into landscaping or building a really great pergola or putting a spa in the backyard or anything like that. Those things will eventually absolutely pay off with increased value, but initially, not at all. So just be aware of that, please, because it's something that you'll if you're in this business long enough, you'll come across it.
Yeah, fantastic. That's been just such a fantastic discussion, Glenn. Really interesting. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yep.
There might still be some questions that people have that are specific to their own circumstances. I'm going to bring up your details here so that if anybody would like to have a chat to you, whether or not you're on board with us or another aggregator, feel free. Glenn is in our office full-time. He's our full-time broker mentor. And as you can see, he's got a real passion for construction finance. So feel free to contact Glenn or give him a call or an email.
You're more than welcome to do that, guys. As Steph said, you don't have to be an MLB partner, member. If you've just got a question, I'm willing to answer it for you, not a problem.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Well, thank you all very much for being on board with us today. We'll have another session in 2 weeks' time for new to industry.
Yep.
I know there's quite a few of you that are existing brokers on board. Tomorrow's session is a conversation with Roscoe, which is Ross Lawrenson, and he's going to talk about cultivating your trail book, and that's going to be very much with his years of experience as a broker. He'll have some fantastic things to share. And on Thursday, we'll be doing a session which will focus more on Chief and the touch points and how to incorporate Chief, the touch points pre-settlement and post-settlement, how to look after your client with your communications, and how to incorporate technology to support you to do that. So that's coming up this week. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you being on board with us today. And for any of you that would like to have a recording or a copy of the pack, feel free to shoot us an email and we'll get that out to you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Steph, and thanks, guys, for being on board.